Hi, I'm Christine Benz from Morningstar. The Secure Act upended some of the rules related to inherited IRAs. Joining me to discuss some of the key questions he receives again and again is tax and IRA expert Ed Slott. Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Christine.
We want to take a look at the rules regarding inherited IRAs, which have changed quite a bit over the past few years. You and I have done a few different segments on
Those
this
again?
topic. People have questions. So we wanted to tackle some of the main questions that people have related to the new inherited IRA rules, starting with what's called an eligible designated beneficiary. Maybe you can talk about who that is and what the rules are for those people.
All right, let me take you back down memory lane because this has been the case now since 2020, actually, and we're in 2024. But you're right, we still get questions, the most common questions, and most common from advisors when their clients ask them. The rules have changed so much. So let's go down, down memory lane in history. Before 2020, if you inherited an IRA and you were a designated beneficiary named on the beneficiary form, an individual, you could do what was called a stretch IRA, an extended deferral, take RMDs over your life expectancy based on your age. You could defer that out for 20, 30, 50, 80 years. Congress didn't like that. They thought it was too big of a break. They killed that in the original Secure Act and replaced it with basically a 10-year window. In other words, they're saying, look, beneficiaries, the party's over. All of these funds have to come out by the end of the 10th year after death. It was effective for deaths, or if you want to put it a nicer way, inheritances in 2020 or later. And that's the situation we had. But then at that point, we thought, all right, it's not the worst thing. At least you have these 10 years and you can take it whenever you want, as long as you empty the account by the end of the 10th year after death. Now, the 10-year rule applied to everyone except a special class of elite that Congress named what you called EDBs, eligible designated beneficiaries, people who still get the stretch IRA, even though it was eliminated for most others. And that's a special class, but there's 5 classes, but basically one big one is the spouse. The spouse could still do anything. The spouse is treated as they were before, so no problem there. They want to do the stretch, the rollover. That's not an issue. The other 4 classes, not so much. You don't see them as much. Minor children are on that list. And people mistake that and they say, oh, so what's the big deal? I leave it to my grandchild. They could go out 70 years. No. Minor children of the deceased IRA owner, not grandchildren. That's a misconception, still is. And even so, they only get the exception where they get to do the stretch. So let's say somebody leaves it to their 14-year-old child. They get the stretch, but only until age 21. Then they, too, are back on the 10-year rule. That's the second category. The third and fourth category are chronically ill and disabled, and if they meet certain tests, they can use the stretch IRA. And the fifth category, maybe there's a few more people in there, people non-spouse beneficiaries not more than 10 years younger than the deceased IRA owner. So that would be a brother, your sibling, partner, friend, something like that, your older brother or somebody, a little around your age, but not more than 10 years younger. I guess the IRS or the tax law figured, Congress wrote that. Congress figured, they're close in age. How long are they going to live anyway? Let's let them have the stretch. And those are the 5 classes. But to even be in those classes, the people have to be designated beneficiaries and individuals, not entities like estates, charities, or non-qualifying trusts. So that means you still have to check beneficiary forms, even for the EDBs, eligible designated beneficiary. You still have to qualify to be a designated beneficiary, which is really easy. You just have to name a living person on the IRA beneficiary form. But we see people a little sloppy with that. Even the 10-year rule people. So everybody else gets the 10-year rule pretty much if they're a designated designated beneficiary. But if they're not a designated beneficiary, they don't even get the 10-year rule. Then they go to the other rules that apply when you don't have a designated beneficiary. That's another whole set of rules that you should never fall into. That means you haven't updated beneficiary forms. You don't have a designated beneficiary. Defaults maybe to your estate. You have an estate, a charity, a non-qualifying trust. And in that case, then the old rules apply. So you have all these rules. The old rules apply. For example, if death is before the required beginning date, so that brings in another thing. The required beginning date is basically is the age 73, just to simplify it. Once you begin taking RMDs. So if you die before that and you don't have a designated beneficiary, everything has to come out by the end of the 5th year after death. If you die after you begin taking RMDs, then it comes out over the deceased IRA owners. And I love this line in the tax code: remaining single life expectancy. So what's the remaining life expectancy of a dead person? 0. That's why I always say remaining life expectancy had they lived. We call it really a ghost life expectancy. You get continue, but hopefully you never hit that category. Let's go back to the main people, the 10-year rule people. That's going to be most of the children, grandchildren, everybody other than the EDBs, the eligible designated beneficiaries. They have to take the funds out by the end of the 10th year after death. But in early 2022, IRS threw a monkey wrench into this when they issued proposed regulations, which are still proposed, but they are the rules now. If somebody died after they began taking RMDs, then during the 10 years, you have to take RMDs for years 1 through 9 of the 10-year term. And at the end of 10 years, you take everything. And that adds another complication because those RMDs for the years 1 through 9 are based on the old stretch IRA rules, based on you, the beneficiary's life expectancy, as if you got the stretch for 9 years. And then at the end of 10 years, everything has to come out. That's only if you inherited from somebody who died after starting RMDs. This got so confusing that nobody to date has been subject to that rule. For 3 years in a row, IRS threw up their hands and say, we're waiving that for these beneficiaries in 21, 22, and 23, because it got so confusing, as you can imagine. So the rule is still in effect for 24, but what I would say, if you're one of those beneficiaries, don't take your RMD if you have to take the years 1 through 9 until late in the year when we're sure it's the rule. IRS came out and waived them again last year in July. So because it got so complicated. And to add another layer to all of this, we're only talking about IRAs. If you're talking about Roth IRAs, it's a different game. Roth IRA owners have no RMDs during their lifetime, but Roth beneficiaries are still subject to the 10-year rule. But a little advantage, if you inherit a Roth, this may be a reason to convert to a Roth and leave your beneficiaries a Roth. If they're subject to the 10-year rule, they never have to take years 1 through 9 RMDs, no matter how old you are. There's a special rule that says anybody that dies with a Roth IRA, even at 99 years old, is deemed to have died before their required beginning date, because there is no required beginning date for Roths during life. So that means they technically never started. So the Roth IRA beneficiaries can wait till the end of that 10th year after death with all that growing accumulation and take it all out income tax free, because you, say, as the parent or grandparent, paid all the tax when you converted and you left them a Roth IRA. Remember, IRA beneficiaries cannot convert an inherited IRA to an inherited Roth. But in a quirk in the rule, if they inherit a 401k for some crazy reason, I think it's an unintended consequence of the law, if they inherit a 401k, that can be converted to an inherited Roth IRA. So it's this quagmire, labyrinth of rules that everybody has to know. And it keeps coming down to me to saying, how can it possibly be this hard to take money out of an IRA? It's crazy.
Right. It certainly is. And Ed, I wanted to ask a more general question, which is, if someone has inherited an IRA and let's say they're not a spouse and they're subject to this 10-year rule, are there any kind of strategies that they should be
Yes.
thinking about to mitigate the tax impact of those distributions that they have to take?
Yeah, let me give you a perfect example. The big strategy is yes, other than a Roth, with a Roth, like I said, don't do if you can hold it to the last day of that 10th year after death because it's all growing income tax free. Other than that scenario, everything will probably be taxable in an inherited traditional IRA. Do you want that giant tax hit as the beneficiary when you may be in your own highest earnings years? Better to smooth it out, even though you're not let's say you inherited from somebody who died before their required beginning date. So you don't even have RMDs until the last one at the end of the 10th year after death. You may want to look at your brackets and take a little each year to smooth out the overall tax bill rather than getting that giant hit in year 10. For example, let's say the people that inherited in 2020, subject to the 10-year rule, right? Now, let's say they inherited from somebody who died, who already began RMD, so they were subject to RMDs for years 1 through 9. But if they inherited in 2020, that's the first year Secure Act took effect, the RMDs for years 1 through 9 were waived by IRS in 21, 22, and 23. So now they only have 7 years left. They may want to get more of that income over the 7 years so they don't have the big hit in year 10.
Well, Ed, a lot to digest here. I'm sure we'll have more questions in the months and years ahead. Thank you so much for being here today.
All right, thanks, Christine.
Thanks for watching. I'm Christine Benz for Morningstar.